So someone on my last video asked me to talk about my favourite bands, and I told them this would be a really short video. It's basically Alice in Chains and Faith No More, and there's no way I could really choose between them. And of course I could expand it and talk about why they're my favourites, but there's a problem there, and I thought I would make the topic of this video instead because I would make that the topic of this video instead because it's not just music. This really affects any form of art that I consume: music, TV, art, even paintings, I suppose. Basically, when you ask someone why a particular piece of art is their favourite, they'll give you a list of reasons why. So in the case of a band, it could be like the quality of their music or the skill of one member in particular. Maybe it's just the chemistry they have together. If it's a film, it'll be the acting, the themes, directing, script. You know what it's like, that kind of thing. But when I'm listening to music, I'm not really focusing on any of the elements relating to how it was created. I'm just focusing on the sound, because every song creates an atmosphere for me, a kind of almost like synesthetic experience in my mind. And my mind will either like or hate that experience. A lot of things contribute to this experience. The song itself, obviously, the context in which it's being played, the people around at the time, the video if it has one, the mood I'm in at the time, and I guess also how it affects that mood, things like that. The quality elements that I mentioned aren't completely unimportant. If they're really blatant and exceptional, well, whether that's good or bad, they can still affect my enjoyment, but their role in the process is secondary to that atmosphere, that experience. I'd be interested to know if you guys relate to that, because I mentioned in my last video I'm autistic and autism can have splinter skills. Some people have synesthesia. I know for a fact that I have perfect pitch, which is the ability to recognize a musical note or pitch without a reference, and the way that works for me is similar to the way that I've heard synesthesia described. I want to talk more about the quality elements, and not to make it too complicated, I'll focus on music specifically. So there's subjective and objective components to music. The subjective ones being things like the emotions of the people creating it, the ones that creates in us, genre, even just the concept of quality itself. There's no such thing as objectively good or bad music. You can get lots of people to agree that this is called intersubjectivity, but these opinions change over time. Among groups, they can change with things completely unrelated to the music, like the politics or actions, maybe even personalities, maybe crimes of the artists or band members. All of these things, whether we think they should or not, inform our perception of the quality of the music. But then there's also objective components. The music itself exists in the real world in the form of sound waves as encoded data in vinyl discs. Vinyl discs, CDs, cassettes, MP3s, streamed, downloaded, doesn't matter. The wave has a specific waveform that determines everything from the pitch to the timbre of the sounds produced. And there are objective components to someone's perceived musical skill. For example, you can measure how accurately a singer stays on pitch. But the important thing is that the objective and subjective components are fundamentally separate. And this is actually an important concept in philosophy, the fact-value distinction. Facts and values are two separate things, and one can't become the other. So you can point out a singer's pitch is more accurate, or you can point out that a singer has an extremely diverse range of vocal abilities. Mike Patton of Faith No More, they mentioned, is probably the master of this. But that doesn't guarantee that we'll value those traits. In the case of Faith No More specifically, Mike's vocals with them are pretty restrained, pretty tame compared to what he does with his other bands and side projects. There's also a knowledge and understanding element to this, because some people can hear a singer doing what they perceive to be weird things with their voice and not understand that what they're doing is really difficult and takes a lot of practice. And that will inform their judgment of what they're listening to, but at the same time the keyword is inform. One thing I really hate when it comes to art criticism is when you have an artist that does really complex and intricate things in their art. They'll tend to attract a following of people that tend to develop a certain amount of snobbery. And what you find a lot of the time is that they'll look down on people that don't like that artist as being stupid. But I find that stupid, because they're assuming that if people did have that same level of understanding of that artist's work, that they'd also like them. but that's completely illogical because facts and values are distinct. You can understand perfectly well what that artist is doing and just not value it. On the other hand, you can have songs or films that are poorly made on numerous levels and still like them. For example, one of the films I watch over and over again is Lucy. Now, I have no intention of defending that on a technical level. It's a complete mess, and it pushes that ridiculous 10% myth about the brain. But the general concept of someone being able to enhance their abilities, the possibilities it gets me thinking about as it relates to things like future technology, transhumanism in particular, that means that I keep wanting to come back to it. And the failings of the film literally don't detract from it at all. Now, I've heard an idea before that you get people who can't articulate why they like something, and the reason is that they're noticing these different, quality indicators on a subconscious level, and by learning about the various crafts involved, they'll learn, they'll more consciously notice these things. I think if this was true, I would have thought I'd made more progress understanding why I like my favourite bands than I have. I mentioned things like what Mike Patton can do, but as I've already said, he's more adventurous in his other projects, and I still like Faith No More better. At the same time, Lane Staley was an amazing singer, but he didn't have the kind of range that Mike Patton had, and yet I like his voice even more. I think there could certainly be a kernel of truth in this argument, but it's just not the whole story. It could also be that certain songs or films are tied to memories of special occasions or even just larger time periods in someone's life, so it creates a feeling of nostalgia. And there are all these different elements to consider. Now, talking about art can be one of the main ways that people get to know each other and become closer, and for reasons I've described last video, this is already something I tend to struggle with. But reacting to art the way I do significantly complicates the situation even more. If I watch something with a group of people afterwards, we'll go to a pub or something and they'll normally critique it, and I'll listen to them, I'll listen to them essentially speaking an alien language. It's not that I don't notice these things, although because I'm paying attention to the general atmosphere, that will be the case a lot of the time. It's more that for them that the facts and the values that I was talking about seem to align. They like or hate the film because of the things they discuss, and noticing the flaws does diminish their appreciation of it. I seem to consistently value different things, with only the most obvious failings having any real impact on my opinion. And so a lot of the time I disagree with them, which limits what I can contribute to their discussion. You can't exactly argue with, I liked the film because atmosphere. I can express these thoughts with people better one-on-one, but in a group it's a lot more awkward. They generally want to discuss this film, and I'll end up turning it into a meta-analysis of aesthetics, and let's just say that's not their cup of tea.